Hi, I am Dr. Kori, the Deputy Director General of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and this is Sounds Strategic, our new podcast that aims to showcase the analytic talent of our institute, the sparkly folks whose independent data collection and analysis on policy-relevant projects defines the work that we do here as an institute and define the culture of the institute. Our purpose in doing it is to hopefully encourage broad interest in the research and the data that they produce. And we are starting off the podcast series with the big sparkly lights of the program, one of whom, Virginia Komolli, is with me today. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you, Kori. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are asking all of the folks we are going to interview on the podcast to answer the same set of questions so that our listeners have a pattern and we have a way to talk about your work and its policy relevance. So start us off by talking about an issue that your research covers. Oh, I'm sorry. I see I'm already failing in my task, which is I have not said nearly enough about talented Virginia Komolli. She is the Senior Fellow in Conflict, Security, and Development. She has not only studied these issues, has worked on them in such a breathtakingly wide span of research. Everything from Ebola and healthcare crises to drug production in Afghanistan to urbanization. And she is not only a first-rate scholar of these issues, but her vision for how to take the Armed Conflict Survey that the International Institute for Strategic Studies publishes and make it dramatically more relevant and a better data source for researchers in government, business, and academia has caused Dr. John Chipman, the director of this institute, to make her the director of our project on conflict, security, and development. So we will get to that later, but let's first talk about how the work that you do is in the news just now.
Well, thank you, Kori. Well, as you know, through the Armed Conflict Survey and also our Armed Conflict database, we regularly, constantly monitor developments in active conflicts around the world. But we also keep an eye on new and emerging or potential conflicts. So in the autumn of 2018, we added a new conflict in our Armed Conflict database, and that is in Cameroon. Cameroon has been in the news quite a lot in the course of 2018 because of mounting violence in the Anglophone regions of Cameroon, where there is a very strong separatist drive and movement. And also, Cameroon is being in the news a lot because of a rather controversial presidential election where President Biya ended up being re-elected for the seventh time.
The seventh time?
Yes. President Biya has been in power a very long time and is being one of those leaders that we've seen quite a few of across sub-Saharan Africa in recent years, who have either amended the constitutions or exert quite a lot of significant pressure on the electorate to secure their extension of their of the power. And this has been met with a growing number of protests that often have become violent.
So if the 80s and 90s were the period of hopefulness about the expansion of democracy across the continent of Africa, does it feel to you like a pall has come over? That is, that authoritarian leaders in many African countries begin to use the trappings of democracy in a way to lock in their power? Or is that too broad a generalization?
I think it's a mixed picture if we look around the continent, because it is fair to say that democratic values and processes are becoming more established. And it was very encouraging when during the presidential elections in the Gambia last year, when the incumbent refused to concede defeat, there was an immediate and very powerful reaction on the part of ECOWAS, the regional economic bloc in West Africa, that put pressure on him to leave and ensure that the newly elected president could actually take over. And so what could have become a serious and violent crisis was actually contained. And it was, I think, a very powerful message that regional leaders sent to future presidents who were unwilling to step down, that actually that would not be tolerated. So there are some reasons to be very hopeful. We've seen more peaceful political transitions in recent years, but unfortunately we still see some leaders who have not yet accepted, the changing world.
Mm-hmm. How did you get interested in the work of conflict, stability, and development, Virginia?
Well, since a young age, I was interested in security and defense matters. And by that I mean probably...
You were actually an intern in this organization, or
yes.
a junior researcher working on the military balance,
yes,
right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
You're the great success story that upward mobility is possible in this institution.
Well, I've been very fortunate, and I spent over 12 years with this organization, and I've been able to grow and explore new issues that perhaps I wasn't so interested in when I was at university. At the time, I was all interested in missile defense and the debate between ballistics versus cruise missiles, which is the greatest threat. I never really thought much of Africa. And ironically, that's actually my main area of focus, and it has been for several years now. And I'm very much drawn into multidisciplinary issues and responses to some of these challenges that we see. So I'm still very much interested in the defense and security dimension, but also I look at the humanitarian impact of some of the challenges that we study, how we can involve a broader range of actors to develop sustainable solutions to conflicts and other forms of instability. So we organize events or write papers that bring in all those components. We have the military, we have the law enforcement, but we also have the human rights and NGO and civil society, and also increasingly in our strand of work on urban security, we bring on board urbanists and architects who can certainly play a huge role alongside the private sector in helping to rebuild post-conflict cities, and also to create more inclusive and sustainable cities in developing countries.
It is one of my favorite things about your program, not just that you are multidisciplinary and you create a program that draws on many different strains of academic and intellectual expertise, but also the way you are training the reflexes of the rest of us to be more inclusive of those things in our own work. It's great modeling of the behavior that spreads through the culture of an institution. I really admire that about what you're doing. Let's talk about your favorite book, though.
Well, it's very hard to pinpoint one single book, but a few years back, I read this book called The Locust Effect. And it's written by two authors, Gary Hagen and Victor Boutros. So the book is related to what we do here at IISS, but actually brings in a different angle, and that's actually what I usually like to read. So basically, the book is based on extensive field work across multiple developing countries, and really studies and documents how, for millions and millions of poor people, the top priority or their top concern is the everyday common violence. So rape, forced labor, illegal detention, land expropriation, police violence, and so on. And so they travel around, Kenya, India, various places in Latin America, and document the failure of the public justice systems in those countries, and how the poorest of society oftentimes have no way to stand up for their rights. So they are exploited in illegal economies, and they are expropriated from their land, and things just so basic such as leaving your home and going to the toilet, because many of these people don't have toilets in house, is a huge challenge, because women get routinely raped on their ways from home to the toilets. These are very basic things, but of course have a tremendous impact on people's everyday lives. So this low-level violence, which is, of course, is not the conflict that I study every day, but it's still something that has such a huge impact on millions and millions of people, and is underpinned by huge impunity. So in many of these countries, unfortunately, if you have money and power, you can just buy your way out of jail or not end up in jail at all. So there is this growing, of course, resentment and a sense of impotence among millions of people in lots of these societies.
So that's really interesting, and suggests too that the rule of law isn't established well, right? Because if people can buy their way out to impunity, then the law isn't functioning for everyone, and it then undercuts the sense of governance being fair as well. So it's a corrosive effect in addition to the immediate justice effects of it. What's the title mean, the locus effect?
Well, basically, is a way of saying that this low-level, common, everyday violence is this plague that kind of eats up societies like locust descending on a village or on a field.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that. So my next question is my favorite of the questions that I always ask people. What's the conventional wisdom in your field that's wrong?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. Oftentimes, we talk about ungoverned spaces. And I take issues with that phrase, because I don't think there is anything of that sort. If a place is ungoverned by the state, is governed by someone else. It's very hard to find areas of the world where there is a complete vacuum of authority. It might not be a state authority, it might not be the conventional one, but you always, or almost always, find how non-state armed groups insert themselves and take advantage of the state's inability to govern and to provide services in certain localities. And this also is linked to another possibly mistaken piece of conventional wisdom that makes people believe that when a place is run by non-state armed groups, and by which I mean jihadists or separatists or organized criminals in case of some slums, is total anarchy and chaos. And that is actually not the case. For two reasons. In the case of some of these ideologically driven groups, such as Daesh, for instance, we know how they did actually try and succeeded to a certain extent and for a certain period of time to establish a state, to provide services, to create their own form of justice and courts, for instance. And other groups in other parts of the world have attempted similar things to varying degrees of success. But also in the case of criminals, especially organized criminals, they are business people. So, of course, they thrive in a place where they can influence government, that they can co-opt the government officials and the police and other people or in positions of authority. But they don't want total chaos because they have to run a business. They still want some basic services to function so that their supply chain is not too badly affected.
Okay, I love that. You're right. It not only, the notion of ungoverned spaces not only is intellectually untrue, but it also leads to bad policy recommendations, right? If you think there's a vacuum, all you have to do is fill it.
Yes.
You don't have to displace an already entrenched force or pattern of behavior. And it makes me think about interviews I have read with Afghans where, we're surprised that they will allow and even support Taliban rule in parts of the country. And I have sometimes read interviews where Afghans say, yeah, but at least there's the rule of law, right? Exactly. Like, it may be harsh, it may be repressive, but it is at least predictable. And so I love it that that's your conventional wisdom that's wrong. It will shape how I think about this issue. Okay, your favorite work you've ever done, the thing you're proudest of, the thing you wish more people knew about that you have worked on.
Okay, well, I'll have two. One,
good. Ambitious woman, I like it.
Well, the number one, really, the thing I'm most proud of is the team that I currently have. And the team has grown a lot in the course of 2018 and is very diverse, is very international, and it brings together people from different backgrounds with plenty of field research and experience in international organizations. And they are extremely smart and energetic, and I feel very fortunate every day I go to work. So I think my biggest achievement has been putting that team together.
You are indeed fortunate, but I would remind you that Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, famously said that he found that luck appeared often dressed in overalls and looks a lot like work, right? Because you created that team. It didn't drop out of the sky to you. You cultivated it, you recruited it, and you nurture the work that they do. And I am super proud of the leadership you have in creating the team that is diverse in so many ways and that models what is for me a fundamental truth, which is that the argument for diversity, among the many good arguments for diversity, the one that strikes me always most is that every successful problem-solving team is diverse. Because it gives you different turns of the kaleidoscope, it gives you different expertise. People don't assume fundamental things because they have to prove them to each other. And your team does that beautifully. What's the second thing you're most proud of?
So the second thing is a book I wrote on Boko Haram, the insurgent group in Nigeria. And I conducted field research in northern Nigeria for it, and I really stretched myself in trying to understand the history of Islam in West Africa, and really go into the detail of that, and also trying to see how similar violent groups that had exploited religious ideology had emerged, evolved, and had been dealt with in the past. So I really tried to understand the developments that, when I started doing the research, weren't very well understood. There weren't many publications on it out. There weren't any books published at that time on the subject, and really trying to place the emergence and the development of Boko Haram into a broader historical but also socioeconomical context. So I was very excited with the work, and I also was excited with the way it was received, and I was very fortunate to be able to present it at the United Nations in New York. And I was very nervous when I heard that the Nigerian permanent representative to the UN was attending on the day. And it was a great relief when she actually thanked me for the work I'd done, because it helped shed some light on the group. And in spite of the fact that I had at times in my writing been quite critical of the military response to the insurgency, I think the fact that I was doing it from a purely objective, fact-based, data-driven perspective, with no hidden political agenda. It was very clear, and so all my feedback, even the most critical one, was welcome.
Yes, it's a terrific book. I commend it. I learned a ton from it. Others will as well. My last question, favorite data visualization?
Okay, so there are lots of sparkly things out there online, and the World Economic Forum has been very prolific in this arena, and they have this rather extraordinary knowledge tool that has plenty of visualization tools built in it, and it's called Mapping Global Transformation. So basically, they've taken lots of different forces that have identified as the driving forces for transformational change across regions, industries, and various global issues. And they've displayed, visually obviously, how they connect to all these different forces across multiple regions. So they have over 120 of these different topics, and that are all interconnected. So for instance, if you pick one, sustainable development, to mention one that is close to me, that's obviously is linked to responsible innovation, which in turn is linked to cities and urbanization, which are linked to urban governance, and that's linked to corruption, and corruption is linked to illicit financial flows. And I could go on and on and on, because these are all like small solar systems, and with the key issue in the middle, and all these planets surrounding the sun that are connected to other parallel solar systems. So it's very interesting, because you can see all these links and interconnections, and it's also complemented by quite a lot of text that you can visualize or hide, whatever you prefer, but it gives you the opportunity, if you want to have a more in-depth read around this issue. So I thought it's a very clever way of connecting all these issues across multiple disciplines.
I do notice that very often we are siloed in our approach to these kinds of problems, and the interactions give enormous multiplier effects to inputs. And so I love it that this shows how these things affect each other and amplify or diminish various effects. Virginia, Komali, thank you so much for taking time to do this. Thank you for the excellent work you do at the IISS, and thank you for the leadership you model and extol for this institution.
Thank you. This has been great fun.